There are few things worse in Overwatch than having to sit in queue in excess of 10 minutes just to then be met with a horrible match experience. You really assume that the matchmaker taking its time to find a game means it is putting more care into making sure to create a fair match, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, how many of your competitive matches come down to the wire for the right reasons? If you're not fighting against Smurf accounts, you're probably having to play around a one-trick refusing to make himself useful, and that's on a good day. Many of us are longing for the 1% of matches that actually feel like solid, proper Overwatch. So when I'm granted a replay in which that is the case, I can't help but want to play the game myself. Now, you guys know me, a lot of these stories episodes usually revolve around silly things happening. Anything from two players teabagging each other back and forth to main tanks flanking to Narnia and beyond. But with me starting to make more episodes based on your guys' replays, I found myself in a unique position to tell stories that take place in corners of the ladder that I myself do not have access to. Yes, that includes the depths of the bronze rank, but apparently also the heights of top 500. Trust me, I was just as surprised as you when I found out that apparently one of my viewers plays in GrandMaster. With my lack of focus on true competition, I didn't figure my content would appeal to such players. Of course, I felt the need to do my due diligence and make sure that Zupo was telling the truth. So to overbuff I went, and lo and behold, we found ourselves a match. Now at this point, I kinda felt like Zupo was taking the piss. Barely 4,000, really? You could've just told me that you're GrandMaster and I wouldn't have thought any less of your submission. But when I went to the Season 29 leaderboards, I was surprised to actually find our friend in the books, right here at number 388. I gotta admit, that kinda blew my mind. The idea that somebody could be considered top 500 below 4,300 SR was ludicrous by Season 4 standards, which was back when I peaked. I mean, can you believe that under these circumstances, your boy would have been considered a top 500 player? Insanity, I tell you. The only thing more insane than that is the fact that Surfshark is still sponsoring my channel. Oh yeah, this video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. It is no secret to anyone following my series that I really love to take inspiration from anime, and let me tell you, I couldn't watch half the catalog of shows I indulge in wasn't it for the power of a virtual private network. I mean, imagine paying the same subscription fee as somebody in the US while only getting a fraction of the shows. Actually, scratch that, you don't need to imagine it because that is the sad reality I lived in before I got Surfshark VPN. What Surfshark can do is change your IP and hide your identity so that websites like Netflix can't region lock you out of the content you desire to watch. Because no matter where you live, there's always more content somewhere else, and with over 3,200 servers in 65 countries under Surfshark's umbrella, you can get your hands on all of it. And if there's one thing that shan't be an obstacle to your conquest for content, it's price. You can save 83% on your subscription, and to top it all off, get 3 extra months for free, simply by clicking the link below and using my promo code Terios. As a matter of fact, they are so confident that you will love the service as much as I do that they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So what are you waiting for? Visit the link in the description below and get binging. Thanks a bunch to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video, and now, onto our standard programming. Now for today's story, we are going to change up the tone a bit. This is no tale of heroes against villains, and as much as Zupo is the one who submitted this replay, I'm not planning to take sides. More than anything, this episode is about two teams of equal strength at the top of the ladder fighting for victory by any means necessary. I also gotta apologize in advance, I haven't been up in these ranks in a really long time, so it's entirely possible that some of these people are big name pro players or streamers, and I will be none the wiser. But the matchmaker does not discriminate, whether a pro player competing in the underbelly of the Blizzard Arena or a ranked player doing the same in the mom's basement, we are all equal in the eyes of the watcher. And that same equality would be mirrored in the compositions our contestants decided to run. Double Sniper was good on Junkertown last time I remembered, and it appears to still be good now, because attackers as well as defenders decide to start the game off featuring at least one long-distance assassin. A less exciting mirror matchup was the inclusion of a double barrier tank lineup. Thankfully, a Mercy Pocketed Hanzo does wonders against shields, meaning Zupo would have his work cut out for himself. Surprisingly, the defenders buckled in response to PSB's Genji. I suppose nobody wants to be on the receiving end of a Hanzo log, so that deflect abilities suddenly appear to be very scary. But deflect alone can hold the blue team hostage only for so long until they push back, with Zupo showcasing what he is made of. 2 eliminations in quick succession would stop the red team in their tracks, with the best thing they can achieve being the attempt of retaliation. The red team's Sigma player Chainlink desperately tried to secure at least 1 elimination before inevitably biting the dust, and while they succeeded in doing so, vengeance came from an unexpected player, with Daisy backhanding sending them back to spawn before rezzing Deception. This early into a match, you can always tell that the opposing Widowmakers are trying to feel each other out. What kinds of angles are they expecting? How fast can they react, and can they get away with just out-aiming them? Either way, it wasn't aim that was lacking more than space, meaning the red team had to push on forward to give their Widowmaker the opportunity to shine. Zupo was definitely feeling the heat of two angry tanks getting tired of being blasted by boosted storm arrows, and while the attacking tanks tried to create space, it was the blue team's Hanzo trying to do the same. The Dragon Strike into Hold combo succeeded in doing some damage, but the red team showed how much better they were at making use of that Orisa pull, with Zupo finally kicking the bucket. Chainlink took advantage of the fact that there was no DPS to scare them into submission to begin establishing the Sigma differential. Of course, the blue Sigma could still count on their Ana's help, but Chainlink was not shy to use their Gravitic Flux in response to that ultimate to really make sure that a comeback would be impossible. And that, it definitely was. A decisive strike leading to a victory for the attackers allowed them to capture the first checkpoint in no more than 2 teamfights. So far, the tank-reliant performance of the red team was beating the DPS prowess of the blue team, but only time can tell if that continues to hold true. For the time being, the defenders seem to have a hard time agreeing to a cohesive playstyle at all, and only Bongo barely allowed him to take advantage of the damage amplification, while the Sigma made it their job to single-handedly contest the enemy Widowmaker. Yuzu remained rather unimpressed as Kashi's Gravitic Flux was met by a Transcendence, leading to the entire lineup remaining unharmed. But the same cannot be said for the blue team, as Chainlink made their way onto the flank to really start messing with them on high ground. That led to the blue team getting systematically dismantled. No amount of single-player carry performance was enough to stop the attackers, as they displayed sheer dominance in both individual impact as well as team play. And the show was far from over, because while Yuzu's presence had been of minor consequence up until this point, they started to warm up on that Widowmaker pick, which really just made the whole situation even worse for the defenders. But as if losing 1 DPS was not bad enough, their second one got caught out shortly after Yuzu domed Zupo. Chainlink tried to keep the ball moving by immediately following up with a Gravitic Flux, but a well-timed accretion stun from the opposing Sigma stopped them before they could annihilate them for good. But that doesn't mean they weren't in trouble. Surviving now does not mean surviving indefinitely, and while the defenders were clinging onto their lives, the card continued to make completely unimpeded progress. To put it in the vernacular of the youngins, the blue team was getting rolled and smoked my doggies. I mean, seriously, imagine literally getting pushed into a corner with a choice between staying there and taking damage or leaving and then taking even more damage. It is that overwhelming advantage that makes Chainlink's decision to push into the defenders so questionable. Rather than actually smoking out the opposition, they gave the defenders a chance to eliminate them. And with 1 out of 2 barriers gone, suddenly the blue team found themselves with a glimmer of hope. And who better to take that glimmer and turn it into a shining beacon than Zupo and Genji. Without their Sigma denying his damage, he could punish the red team for every wrong step they took. It was easy pickings from here on out. One mistake exploded was turned into an avalanche that allowed the blue team to stop the card just shy of the final point. Of course, a single victorious team fight a strong team doesn't make. The defenders had to continue that performance and frankly enhance it, because if you believe that a team of Grandmasters was beaten on the back of one fight, then you'd be gravely mistaken. Yuzu in particular was itching to be in the spotlight. Every passing minute in this match just made them even more deadly, and if you're brazen enough to do as much as jumping at the wrong time, they are definitely out to punish you for it. The red team was definitely turning up the heat, and it's not like the blue team wasn't playing well, it's just that when the margin is so small, any single cooldown can make the difference, especially with super powerful ones like Immortality Field cheesing you out of a kill just to then have you end up on the chopping block instead. Both Sigmas had to learn that ultimates are not surefire ways of winning fights in this rank, shy of stacking them up to high heavens. Attackers as well as defenders did well in combining their cooldowns to create tangible advantages, and as such, it was really hard to tell who was on the winning side at any point in time. As a matter of fact, PSB, now having swapped to McCree, was seemingly putting themselves in a very obviously bad position to get ganked. Obviously, the defenders tried to exploit that mistake, but suddenly the red team Uno reverse coded them into not only saving their McCree, but turning it into a widescreen TV powered ambush. The blue team did well trying to counter it with their own amplification matrix, but at that point their defensive cooldowns were already exhausted, allowing the attackers to gain the upper hand. Daisy had since swapped to Zenyatta in hopes of adding more damage to fight the enemy team's double barrier composition, but with all their teammates falling around them, they were in a very tight spot. The card had almost reached the final checkpoint and nobody was there to stall it, meaning Daisy was left with no choice but to blow Transcendence on themselves just to buy some time for the team to come back. And they did eventually come back, though they couldn't hope to win on the back of another mistake sides of the red team. Ultimates were dropped on the battlefield, bullets were whizzing past their heads, someone left with a choice between taking out the Bongo or contesting the Widowmaker. Zupo felt the need to focus what he was meant to counter, but alas, to no avail. Between PSB holding their Deadeye and Yuzu holding down right click, there was no way for the defenders to keep their stalling attempts alive. The red team succeeded in capturing the final objective with obvious superiority, leaving Zupo and his comrades to pick up the pieces. But the whole is more than the sum of its parts, and there were definitely signs of life coming from the blue team, so I hope you got your favorite snacks in arm's reach, my friends, because this game is far from over. So far into this match, one thing was very apparent. The blue team had the skill, but they were definitely lacking the coordination. While every member of the red team was fully capable of executing fight-winning plays all on their own, they also succeeded in coming together as a unit whenever the time called for it. Those were the signs of true grandmasters, and if the blue team wanted to have a shot at victory, they needed to find a way to mimic that success. And as per Zupo's report, everyone on his team had the same mindset about finding their mistakes, squashing them, and coming back even stronger. Which is cool and all, except they were still getting absolutely toasted. Their hearts were in the right place, absolutely, but a good attitude had to be backed up by good gameplay, and as it stands, their entry to this round showed anything but that. The defenders were displaying really well how timing their cooldowns perfectly made all the difference, and every time the attackers thought they had an opportunity, the red team found a way to fool them into feeding the grinder. Is there still a chance for Zupo to shine? How can the blue team hope to find a crack in the defender's seemingly impenetrable armor? And what does a man have to do to get you guys to smash that like button? Well, I don't have the answer to all these questions, but at least two of them. Remember when Zupo popped off on defense as soon as Chainlink got a bit overzealous? The blue team doesn't have to find a crack in the defender's armor because they are so confident that they are willing to take it off. One wrong step allowed Zupo to finish PSV with an instant headshot, and suddenly the chase was on. Find the opportunity, reach out to grasp it, and never let go. Deception made sure that Yuzu wouldn't be able to equalize the engagement by counter-sniping, and that aforementioned coordination now led the red team to committing a lot of their attention to sustaining their backline. The defenders were hanging on by a thread. Their place remained solid, but without that proverbial armor of theirs, they couldn't help but have to tank some gut punches. The attackers were beginning to gain ground, but seeing as how PSB was at fault for causing that situation, they were determined to make up for it. A massive deadeye was meant to crush the blue team's spirit, but it came at the cost of their own life. But rather than succumbing to desperation, Deception and Luca decided to kick it into overdrive. As if they were feeding off their teammates' sacrifice, they began absolutely cleaning house to make sure that they didn't fall in vain. At long last, the blue team seemed to have a fighting chance, and at this point it doesn't even matter how they got here, because there's one thing and one thing only that is an undeniable fact on Payload maps: momentum is king. It is exponentially more difficult to get a stalled payload moving than it is to keep a moving payload rolling, and Deception was ready to prove that simple fact, because rather than hoping for the red team to make a mistake, they decided to full send it into their backline as they attempted to regroup. Yuzu eventually stopped the backline menace from doing even more damage, but that was a short-lived victory for Daisy and fully prepared to scrape them off the floor. Though frustratingly enough, things just weren't meant to be that easy. Chainlink was putting up a masterclass in creating space, and the rest of the team knew exactly what to do to follow up on it. I mean, I know that I proclaimed I didn't want to take sides, but the blue team is really appealing to my underdog bias with how often they are getting stomped into the ground. I really mean what I said about the idea of momentum on payloads. The red team now had every chance to get into position and blast their opposition as they tried to get onto the card, and that just makes it so much more difficult to get it across the finish line, as opposed to being able to keep the defenders staggered. Chainlink was now fully prepared for Deception's flanking shenanigans, not allowing them to pull the same trick twice, and when Zupo tried to create some space with a Dragon Strike, Yuzu made him pay for daring to stand still. Though Daisy was there once again to give him a chance at redemption, and when given the chance to do things over again, Zupo definitely wouldn't miss. The enemy Hammond was trying to eliminate that pesky support line of theirs, but they definitely have to try harder than that to catch them off guard. Somebody who was trying harder was Zupo yet again. While Luca and Deception bought them the opportunity to get this far in the first place, he now felt the need to return that favor by kicking it into second gear. Without Yuzu holding down open sightlines, the Blue Hansa could really go to town in rather blunt fashion, and when the dust settled after his rampage was over, only the attackers remained. At this point, I'm kinda scared of getting my hopes up. It's really exciting to see how the blue team just refuses to give up, no matter how often they get outplayed, but realistically, their chances were slim. Any hint of momentum Zupo and friends managed to build up was immediately shut down by a combination of superior cooldown management as well as smart usage of ultimates. Yeah, I'm not gonna pretend like it's been smooth sailing on the back of that fight, because the blue team definitely had to re-engage anew, but every loss that was inflicted upon them, they decided to wear with pride. Just like an actual shonen protagonist, their losses made them stronger. They learned from their mistakes and elevated their gameplay bit by bit. Soon, it wasn't an exploit of misplays that kept them in the match, more than them finally cracking the red team's defenses wide open. The defenders seemed to be under the impression that they could force their way to victory the same way they did before, but boy howdy were they wrong, because now the attackers were ready. They knew their playstyle, they turned their own strategies against them, and they would show them what happens when they underestimate the underdog. Sure, their time bank gank wasn't as good as the red team's, but that would be of minor consequence, because by the end of their attack round, the blue team finally found their footing in this match. All they had to do was take what they learned and successfully apply it one final time. This match, to me anyway, illustrates what competitive play in Overwatch should be all about. Two teams displaying top-of-the-line performance for their class, stellar team play only beaten by professional players, and a willingness to put aside their egos to give it their all. Ladies and gentlemen, there's absolutely nothing on the line here besides online bragging rights, and yet the drive to improve and the desire for victory is pushing each and every player to their limits. Little did they know that this would eventually serve as entertainment for a lot of us, but I'm happy to immortalize this fantastic game of Overwatch. Tensions are high going to the third round of this match. More than ever before, any single mistake could snowball into certain doom for either of these teams, and 18 minutes into a game, nobody wants to be the reason they have to face a defeat screen. There was no high-risk, high-reward playstyle at display here. Everyone knew what had to be done. While the attackers were trying to slowly pry the red team's defenses open, the defenders themselves knew they had to end this round in one fell swoop as soon as overtime hit. But the blue team's assault was relentless. At this point, they knew their tricks and how to play around them, so unless the defenders could pull a new trick out of their sleeves, their only hope was their ultimate bank. As if the roles had been thrown upside down, it was now the blue team that showed obvious superiority as they forced their way onward without granting their opposition as much as an inch of space. The most important part for Zupo and his friends was getting into this round in the first place. On Payload maps, a stronger time bank is about as valuable as gold bars in the apocalypse. Sure, you can bludgeon somebody with it, but it isn't going to buy you much of anything. In these lands, chances are you'll cover more distance during overtime than outside of it, meaning that as long as the blue team plays their cards right, their previous struggles aren't going to give them a handicap. Everyone must have been incredibly on edge at that point. Any player the defenders lost made it more difficult to come at the blue team with full force, and the attackers had to make sure to stay on the objective at all times while keeping the red team staggered. There were strong plays coming from both sides to be sure, but timing was everything. Trying to elaborate on an early pick by dumping whatever ultimates you have is not a bad idea in this case, but it becomes an issue when you decide to do so after the attackers captured the second point. The red team could not successfully whittle down the attacking forces as their spawn room had moved to be literally right behind them, and at the end of this fight, they had just wasted a bunch of ultimates without achieving their goal. But eventually, the overtime mechanic that the blue team played around so well will be the very thing that brings them to their knees. The respawn timer in conjunction with an ever-increasing distance to their spawn room meant the red team could finally pick them apart to end their streak. And before they knew it, everyone found themselves in the very last round of this match. Are you guys ready to find out who takes home the dub? Because I, for one, cannot wait. Just like Yuzu couldn't wait to get on the flank and create some chaos, in true GrandMaster fashion, he made sure that nobody is lurking in the shadows before pushing on forward. But before even getting to be annoying, he found himself in a Tracer 1v1. Deception had been a thorn in Yuzu's side all throughout this game, probably causing him to get off Widowmaker in the first place. And that would continue to hold true as the blue Tracer stopped the red one from getting to their backline. But PSB 2 made a swap to their hero of choice. Most high-ranked players usually try to make their best heroes work as much as possible, so swapping to something creative is usually either a sign of desperation or the mark of a cheese comp. But whatever the reason for the swap was, it was working remarkably well. Getting to charge the beam for free on the blue team's double barrier composition meant the defenders had no choice but to give up space, or else they would find themselves microwaved in no time at all. This was not part of the red team's playstyle. It really felt like Zupo and friends had figured out their opposition just for them to now turn everything upside down. That unexpected shift in playstyle must have been the reason for many a misplay, allowing the red team to make a lot of immediate progress without even touching overtime. The red team's entry into their final attack round was a lot more explosive. The blue team really had to watch their step because one move in the wrong direction put them between PSB's max damage beam and Yuzu's annoying backline poke. Though annoying as Yuzu was, it wasn't a problem that Zupo could not handle. Deception definitely appeared to be the more confident Tracer player on the field, but just getting rid of a flanker is not going to win this game. Zupo did not have the luxury of waiting for overtime. The red team's assault was in full swing, and if things continue as they are right now, the attackers are going to win on the back of that time bank alone, which makes his decision to hold Dragon Strike even more baffling in the face of PSB's Symmetra ultimate that only he could hope to get damage past. Surviving Kashi's Gravitic Flux meant that Chainlink now had free reign to make a bigger impact with their own ultimate. Not only did the red team not stop, but they continued to accelerate as the entirety of Zupo's team found itself flattened as a result of his decision. I mean, Dragon Strike wouldn't have meant surefire victory, but it would have given them a better chance offensive combined with Kashi's Gravitic Flux. The attackers were approaching the final stretch of their assault with an empty ultimate bank, sure, but we all know how good this team is at combining their cooldowns alone to turn the tide. Meanwhile, the blue team's Sought to Pharah was definitely reeking of desperation. Even without long-range DPS on the team, Baptiste alone would be enough to keep Deception and Daisy at bay, while the rest of their team bulldozes the remaining defenders. And since Deception was the only one actively keeping Yuzu at bay, there was nothing stopping him from approaching the rear and tearing them a new one. That thing I said earlier about him not being the strongest Tracer player on the field, yeah, that does not mean he's bad, and without his competitor as a roadblock, he made for an unstoppable force. No singular ultimate was enough to stop the red team, and as much as I attribute a great deal of this loss to Zupo's decision to hold his ultimate, I have to admit that this was just really well played by their opposition. The only reason my man was even put in that spot in the first place was because of how well the enemy team was approaching their offense. To swap crucial parts of their composition as soon as the blue team found a way to counter them was a stroke of genius. And as such, I have to admit that this victory was well deserved. Here's hoping that I also earned you guys a subscription after that long boy of an episode. So yeah, thank everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you want to see more, and definitely ring that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace.